The member for Mawson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The member for West Torrens quoted his favourite Prime Minister, Paul Keating. I want to quote my favourite Prime Minister, and that was Bob Hawke, who I guess lined up with my thoughts on voluntary assisted dying when he said, "I can see no logical or moral basis for such an absurd position," and that is for those who were opposed to a law that would allow this. And he said, "Politicians, by and large, are not the bravest of creatures." And I think in this debate over the years, and I've been in here 15 years and always come down on the same side, and that is for voluntary assisted dying. But I think what's changed here is you've always got your people like me on one side and people who are on the other side of the debate, but there were a lot of people in the middle who perhaps thought that the community wanted something, and they erred on the side of caution not to vote for it. And we get to see how this vote will go tonight. To change the views of people in here has taken an extraordinary amount of work by so many people in our community to bring the people with them to explain to all of us in here that there is a lot of support for voluntary assisted dying in our community. So I want to start by thanking, I guess, the most visible people, Andrew Denton, Lainey Anderson, for the role you played in the media. But we had an amazing amount of people out there in our regions in South Australia, an area where perhaps, and I grew up on a dairy farm, where people sort of think that it's a more conservative part of our society. But people out there also have strong feelings about people having choice about how they end their lives. So to Angie Miller from my own electorate in Aldinga, whose family saw firsthand how death shouldn't be, thank you. Liz Herberman from Woodner, the bakery over there, whose son died in terrible circumstances and whose family went through 18 months of hell after he died because of legal processes that won't be needed after this bill passes. Jackie Posingham from the Barossa, Jane Qualman from the South East, Kylie Hicklin from Kadina at the top of York Peninsula. We've also been supported for many, many years by people from peak bodies, advocacy groups and unions. Anne Bunning, Francis Coombe, Rob Bonner, Jackie Wood, Lisa Davey. Doctors and nurses have shared their deep technical knowledge and experience working with people at end of life, in particular Roger Hunt, Arnold Gillespie, Susie Byrne and so many others. I haven't got to speak on this bill yet, so I would like to explain to the people that I represent in here, the people of Mawson who have contacted me in large numbers, both for and against, to put where my views come from on this, and that is to support this bill and support voluntary assisted dying in general. And, it was interesting to see the Archbishop, the Catholic Archbishop, come out last week sort of explaining how we should be looking at things as politicians. Well, one of my cousins was the Catholic Archbishop of Adelaide, Philip Kennedy, and I grew up as an altar boy, went to Catholic schools, and I think I must have paid more attention to the bits, or I like the bits more about the compassion story that we learnt in the Catholic school, more so than the suffering is good and if you go through the pain then you will go to a higher place, because we sort of, anyone who went through the Catholic system sort of remembers that. But I remember in 1991, my grandfather was in his mid-80s, a devout Catholic, and he was laying there like he had for 3 years, in a nursing home, in a shared room with lino and pretty stark sort of surroundings. And he was in a world of pain. He had Parkinson's, he'd had sciatica problems for years and years and years. And I was mid-20s, and I said, wouldn't it be good if they could just give you an injection and just speed things up a little bit? And he was horrified. And you know what? If this bill passes tonight, people like my grandfather, Henry Kennedy, he don't have to partake in it. It's voluntary. And but there will be others who may want to. My own father, he died 20 years ago this weekend. It was a June-long weekend. He found out 3 months before that he had terminal cancer. A bloke, dairy farmer, who hardly ever went to the doctor, 61, he rings me up, he goes, can you come down and see me? And he was like a real Liberal Party and Country Party fan. I go down there and he said, I went to the doctor, I've had this guts ache. He goes, I've got cancer, I've got 3 months to live. And I said, well, I reckon you've had better days because I joined the Labor Party today. And we had this sort of sense of humour for the whole sort of final 3 months that he did have with us, including that last weekend. But before we got to that last weekend, that June long weekend, he wanted to explore all sorts of things. He just didn't want to have any treatment. And then he was scared of the pain. He was scared of what laid ahead. He was scared of the suffering that he might face. And he asked me to go and get him this book. And it's called The Final Exit. It's the practicalities of self-deliverance and assisted suicide for the dying. So without this law that we hopefully will pass tonight, people had to get a book and work out how to do it themselves. The book is a Category 1 restricted book, and it's wrapped in plastic, and it's still wrapped in that plastic because by the time I actually got the book and took it to Dad, I think he'd sort of worked out, well, I'll just stick with it and see how it goes. Anyway, so at this stage, he was sort of thinking, I want to go meet my maker. By the time the June long weekend came around, he just wanted to go and see his mum again, who was Nan Bignell in her late 80s, down in Millicent. He wanted to go and see his mum. He also wanted to go and see Mary McKillop at Penola and say a few final prayers down there. And we went to the Noongar Hospital so he could have a blood transfusion because he had the most amazing palliative care and doctors around him who did an amazing job, and our family will always be grateful. So we did the blood transfusion on the Saturday morning. My sister had come down from Brisbane, Jacinta. My other sister, Tony, had come in from Melbourne. They'd hired a Tarago because Dad wanted to go to Penola. And anyway, he has the blood transfusion. The doctor comes in and says, Trev, it didn't work. Your platelets or whatever it is aren't up to scratch. You won't have the strength to go. So the doctor walks out of the room and Dad, in his normal way, goes, get the car started, let's go. We're going to go to Penola. And my sisters are going, yeah. I said, I'm not coming. This is going to be like Weekend at Bernie's. We're going to be driving around in a Tarago with a dead bloke. So he went down, he saw his mum, they stayed overnight, they went to church at St Joseph's in Penola, where I was an older boy, and he said his final prayers with Mary McKillop. He came back. He was in his own bed that night. We were all around him when he took his final breaths. And he never used the voluntary euthanasia, but it was open there for him. Well, with this legislation now, 20 years on, it is open to people like my dad and like so many other people who don't want to go through those final stages of suffering. Can I thank the Deputy Opposition Leader, the member for Port Adelaide, for all the great work you have done on this, and to everyone in this chamber. You know, everyone's gone about this in a really respectful way. The Deputy Speaker, thank you. You're a true gentleman and an ornament to this place. Thank you for everything you've done. To Kai Ma, your mum Viv would be very proud of you, mate. And it's great that you've got your family around you, and thank you for getting us to this stage. We all really appreciate it, and generations of South Australians will appreciate it if we get this bill through tonight. Thank you.